Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. The morning mist clung to the ruins of the Temple of Seven Moons like ghostly fingers, creating an atmosphere that seemed appropriate for what might be humanity's last chance at peace with the Sanguine Empire. Sergeant Alex "Lucky" Murphy adjusted his tactical vest for the dozenth time, checking his sidearm and the diplomatic immunity tags that marked him as part of the prisoner exchange detail rather than active combat personnel. The irony of his nickname wasn't lost on him. After 8 months of warfare on Kethra Prime, anyone still breathing was considered lucky. "Remember, people," Captain Reeves addressed the assembled squad through their comm units, "this is a diplomatic mission. We're here to facilitate the exchange, not restart the war. Keep your weapons ready but your trigger fingers relaxed. The last thing we need is some jumpy private starting an incident because a sanguine twitched wrong." Alex nodded along with the rest of his team, though his attention was focused on the approaching sanguine transport. The vessel looked more like a work of art than military hardware. Its biometallic hull shifted through deep purples and silvers while maintaining perfect silence as it settled onto the designated landing zone. After months of fighting these beings, Alex still found their technology both beautiful and terrifying. The human prisoners they were here to collect shuffled in their holding area, a mix of captured soldiers, civilian researchers, and unlucky merchants who'd been in the wrong place when hostilities erupted. Most showed signs of decent treatment. The Sanguines had a code of honor that prevented them from torturing prisoners, though their idea of appropriate nutrition for human captives often left much to be desired. "Transport's landing," called out Private Jensen from his overwatch position. "I count 12 Sanguine personnel, plus what looks like their prisoner contingent." Alex raised his binoculars to observe the approaching group. The Sanguines moved with their characteristic fluid grace, their pointed ears adorned with ceremonial ornaments that indicated diplomatic status. Their pale, luminescent skin seemed to glow softly in the morning light, and their robes flowed around them like liquid shadow. Even as enemies, Alex had to admit they were magnificent beings. But it was the prisoners that caught his attention. 7 figures in restraint collars that prevented them from using their life-draining abilities, their elegant robes replaced with plain gray garments that did nothing to diminish their otherworldly beauty. 6 of them maintained the dignified bearing that seemed characteristic of their species, walking with heads held high despite their circumstances. The 7th prisoner was different. She stumbled slightly as she walked, her pale skin bearing a grayish pallor that spoke of malnutrition or worse. Her dark hair hung limp around her shoulders, and the pointed ears that marked her as sanguine were bare of any ornamentation. Where the others moved with fluid grace, she seemed to struggle with each step, as if her strength had been systematically drained away. "Who's the one that looks like she's been through a meat grinder?" Alex asked quietly into his comm. Captain Reeves consulted his tablet. "That would be Seraphina Nightwhisper, captured during the Meridian Station raid 2 months ago. Intelligence classifies her as a Bloodmage, one of their elite life-drain specialists. Apparently, she single-handedly killed 38 human soldiers before we took her down." Alex studied Seraphina through his binoculars, trying to reconcile the broken-looking figure before him with the fearsome reputation described in the intelligence reports. She couldn't be more than average height for a sanguine, which put her slightly shorter than most humans, and while her features held the ethereal beauty characteristic of her species, her violet eyes seemed hollow, empty of the fierce intelligence that supposedly made her such a dangerous opponent. The exchange ceremony began with the formal protocols established during previous negotiations. Representatives from both sides verified the identities of prisoners and confirmed their medical status, while military observers from neutral species monitored the proceedings to ensure compliance with interstellar law. Alex watched as the human prisoners were processed, noting with relief that most appeared to be in reasonable health. The Sanguines, despite being enemies, had apparently honored the conventions regarding prisoner treatment. The same couldn't necessarily be said for the human side of the exchange. As the Sanguine prisoners were brought forward for identification, Alex noticed something that hadn't been mentioned in any intelligence briefings. The other 6 prisoners maintained their distance from Seraphina, their expressions showing a mixture of fear and what might have been disgust. Even among her own people, she appeared to be treated as an outcast. Interesting social dynamics, muttered Dr. Yates, the xenopsychologist attached to their unit for the exchange. The other sanguines are avoiding their own teammate like she's contaminated. The formal identification process proceeded smoothly until they reached Seraphina. When her name was called, she approached the verification station with obvious reluctance, her movements suggesting someone who had learned to expect pain from every interaction with authority figures. The sanguine diplomatic representative, a tall male with elaborate silver ornaments decorating his pointed ears, barely glanced at Seraphina before confirming her identity. Seraphina Nightwhisper, 3rd Circle Bloodmage, convicted of emotional instability and tactical failures resulting in capture. The council acknowledges her return. Alex caught the slight flinch that crossed Seraphina's features at the words, emotional instability, and tactical failures. Even allowing for species differences in expression, the hurt was unmistakable. The exchange continued without incident until Private Kowalski, apparently nervous about being so close to a legendary enemy killer, made a sudden movement toward his sidearm when Seraphina stumbled slightly during the prisoner transfer. The sanguine guards reacted instantly, their own weapons materializing from what had appeared to be ceremonial robes. "Stand down!" Captain Reeves barked, even as the sanguine commander issued similar orders in their melodious language. In the confusion, one of the human guards struck Seraphina with his rifle butt, sending her stumbling backward. Instead of falling, she somehow managed to position herself between the young sanguine prisoner behind her and the human guards, taking a second blow to her ribs to shield him from harm. "Enough!" Alex found himself shouting, moving between the guards and the prisoners. "She's cooperating. There's no need for violence." Captain Reeves shot him a warning look, but the tension de-escalated as both sides stepped back. Seraphina remained on her knees where she'd fallen, one arm wrapped around her ribs, but her violet eyes were fixed on Alex with an expression of profound confusion. The exchange concluded without further incident, but Alex couldn't shake the image of Seraphina's expression. Not gratitude, which he might have expected, but bewilderment, as if the concept of someone intervening on her behalf was completely foreign to her experience. As the sanguine transport prepared for departure, Alex found himself helping Seraphina to her feet. Her skin was cold to the touch, colder than human skin should ever be, and he could feel the tremor of weakness in her frame. "Thank you," she said in accented standard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not understand why you helped me, but, thank you." Before Alex could respond, she was guided toward the transport by her own people, who maintained their careful distance even while ensuring she boarded safely. As the ship lifted off into the morning sky, Alex caught a last glimpse of Seraphina through one of the viewports. She was watching him, her expression still holding that same confused wonderment. "Murphy," Captain Reeves called out, "good job keeping things calm back there. Though I should remind you that prisoners are prisoners, regardless of how they're treated by their own people." "Understood, sir," Alex replied, but his attention remained focused on the disappearing sanguine transport. That evening, back at Forward Operating Base Delta 9, Alex found himself unable to concentrate on his duty reports. The image of Seraphina's confusion when he'd helped her kept returning to his thoughts. He'd seen that expression before, on rescue victims who'd been isolated so long they'd forgotten that kindness existed. "Can't sleep either." Dr. Yates settled into the chair across from Alex in the base's recreation area. "I've been thinking about today's exchange. Specifically, about the sanguine prisoner dynamics." "What did you observe?" Alex asked, grateful for a chance to discuss his concerns with someone trained in xenopsychology. "Seraphina Nightwhisper is being systematically ostracized by her own people," Dr. Yates said bluntly. "The way they avoided her, the formal language used to describe her status, the complete lack of concern when she was struck, it all suggests she's been classified as some kind of pariah within their social structure." Alex leaned forward. "Any idea why?" "Speculation only, but based on their comment about emotional instability, I suspect she's guilty of the cardinal sin in sanguine culture, showing feelings." They value control and logical detachment above all else. A Bloodmage who demonstrates empathy or emotional responses would be seen as fundamentally flawed. So they use her as a weapon but treat her like she's diseased. That would be my assessment. And if I'm right, then what you did today, showing her basic human decency, was probably the first act of genuine kindness she's experienced in decades, possibly centuries. Alex stared out the window at the alien constellations of Kethra Prime, thinking about violet eyes filled with confusion at the simple act of helping someone stand up. Somewhere out there, Seraphina Nightwhisper was probably being debriefed about her captivity, her failures, and her return to a society that viewed her emotional nature as a defect to be exploited rather than a trait to be valued. For the first time since arriving on Kethra Prime, Alex found himself wondering if they were fighting the right enemy. The Sanguines were dangerous, certainly, but what kind of people treated their own soldiers as disposable weapons simply for having feelings? As he finally headed to his bunk, Alex made a mental note to pay more attention to intelligence reports about Sanguine force deployments. Something told him that his encounter with Seraphina Nightwhisper was far from over, and next time, he wanted to be prepared for more than just a prisoner exchange. After all, in 8 centuries of existence, no one had ever given her a simple act of kindness. Maybe it was time someone changed that pattern, regardless of which side of the war they happened to be fighting on. 3 days after the prisoner exchange, Forward Operating Base Delta 9 buzzed with the controlled chaos of military intelligence processing what appeared to be the largest Sanguine troop movement since the war began. Alex stood in the briefing room with the rest of his squad, studying holographic displays showing enemy positions around the abandoned mining colony of Zera Station. Reconnaissance indicates approximately 200 Sanguine personnel have established positions in and around the facility, Captain Reeves explained, his laser pointer highlighting key defensive positions. Intelligence suggests they're using the mining complex as a staging area for a major offensive against our supply lines. Alex studied the tactical display, noting something that didn't match the typical Sanguine attack patterns they'd observed over the past months. "Sir, the positioning looks more defensive than offensive. And why choose a location with compromised atmospheric barriers?" The mining accident 6 months ago left the entire complex exposed to toxic atmospheric contamination. Private Jensen raised his hand. "Maybe they're immune to the atmospheric toxins." Dr. Yates, who had been attached to their unit since the prisoner exchange, shook her head. Sanguine physiology is actually more susceptible to atmospheric contamination than human biology. They require extremely pure air to maintain their life force processing abilities. Captain Reeves nodded grimly. Which makes their choice of location even more concerning. Either they're desperate enough to accept massive casualties, or they have some way of neutralizing the contamination that we don't know about. Either way, we need intelligence. Murphy, your team will conduct reconnaissance and report enemy strength and capabilities. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. 4 hours later, Alex found himself lying prone on a ridge overlooking Zera Station, his enhanced optics providing detailed views of the Sanguine installation below. What he saw didn't match any intelligence assessment he'd ever read. "This isn't a military staging area," he whispered into his comm. "Jensen, are you seeing this?" Through his scope, Jensen observed the same scene that had captured Alex's attention. The Sanguines below weren't preparing for offensive operations, they were dying. Dozens of figures lay motionless in what appeared to be makeshift medical areas, while others moved weakly between improvised shelters. The atmospheric contamination that made Zera Station uninhabitable for long-term occupation was slowly killing everyone inside. "Why would they bring their people here?" asked Corporal Davidson, the team's medic. "This is suicide." Alex tracked his scope across the facility, looking for command personnel or defensive positions. Instead, he found her. Seraphina Nightwhisper knelt beside a group of what appeared to be civilian refugees, her hands resting on the chest of an unconscious Sanguine child. Even from a distance, Alex could see the distinctive glow that indicated active life force manipulation. "She's healing them," he breathed, adjusting his scope for better resolution. "She's using her abilities to keep them alive." Through the magnified view, Alex watched as Seraphina moved from patient to patient, sharing her own life force to temporarily counteract the atmospheric poisoning. With each person she helped, her own condition deteriorated visibly. Her already pale skin became translucent, and her movements grew increasingly unsteady. "Sergeant," Jensen's voice carried concern, "I count at least 50 civilians down there, including children. This isn't a military operation, it's a refugee evacuation." Alex observed for another hour, documenting what appeared to be a desperate attempt to move non-combatant sanguines away from active combat zones. The mining facility provided the only available shelter in the region, despite its toxic atmosphere. Seraphina worked tirelessly among the survivors, and Alex realized she hadn't stopped to rest or feed in the entire time he'd been watching. When was the last time she ate, he found himself asking aloud. "Sanguines don't eat food the way we do," Dr. Yates had explained during cultural briefings. "They absorb life force from living beings to sustain themselves." But if she's giving her life force away instead of taking it? Alex completed the thought. She's slowly killing herself to keep them alive. The ethical implications of the situation crashed over him like a physical weight. These weren't enemy combatants preparing for battle. They were refugees seeking shelter, with one desperately selfless individual sacrificing herself to keep them breathing in a poisoned environment. Alex made a decision that would probably end his military career. "Team, establish overwatch positions and monitor for enemy patrols." "I'm going down there." "Sergeant, that's not the mission," Davidson protested. "The mission is reconnaissance and intelligence gathering," Alex replied, already moving toward his pack. "I need to know if this is a humanitarian crisis or a military deception. Only way to be sure is ground truth intelligence." Jensen's voice carried skepticism. "And you plan to just walk into an enemy camp and ask?" Alex held up the small white flag he'd improvised from medical bandaging. "Parley protocols are recognized by both sides. They can't shoot me under a flag of truce without violating interstellar law." What Alex didn't mention to his team were the items he'd pulled from his personal pack. His emergency ration supplies and something more precious, a small flowering cutting from Earth's last botanical preserve that his sister had given him before deployment. The plant had somehow survived months of military transport and storage, a tiny reminder of home and hope in a universe full of violence. The descent to Xeris Station took 20 minutes, during which Alex questioned his sanity approximately once per minute. But the image of Seraphina sacrificing her own life to save others overrode his survival instincts. If their positions were reversed, if human refugees were dying while one person slowly killed herself to keep them alive, he hoped a sanguine soldier might show similar compassion. The outer perimeter guards spotted him immediately, their weapons tracking his approach with deadly precision. Alex maintained steady pace, his white flag clearly visible, his hands carefully positioned away from his weapons. "I request parley under Interstellar Convention Article 12, he called out in his basic sanguine, hoping his pronunciation wouldn't start a firefight. "I have supplies for humanitarian relief." The guards exchanged rapid communication in their melodious language, clearly uncertain about how to respond to a human soldier requesting peaceful contact during active hostilities. After several tense minutes, a familiar figure emerged from the inner facility. Seraphina approached slowly, her condition even worse than Alex had observed through his scope. Her violet eyes held the same confusion he remembered from their previous encounter, but now they also showed exhaustion that bordered on collapse. "Sergeant Murphy," she said in accented standard, her voice barely strong enough to carry across the space between them. "Why are you here?" Alex gestured toward the emergency supplies he carried. Intelligence indicated a large military buildup at this location. "What I found was a refugee camp with people dying from atmospheric contamination." He held up his pack. "I brought food supplies and medical equipment." Seraphina stared at the offered supplies as if they were artifacts from an alien civilization. "You brought supplies? For us?" "For the civilians," Alex clarified, then added more softly, "and for you." you look like you haven't eaten in days." The confusion in Seraphina's expression deepened into something approaching wonder. "In 8 centuries," she whispered, "no one has ever offered me anything without expecting payment in blood." Alex extended the emergency rations and then, almost shyly, brought out the small potted flower. "This is from Earth. My sister said it represents hope and new beginnings. I thought, maybe you could use some hope right now." Seraphina accepted the items with hands that trembled from exhaustion and emotion. She held the tiny flowering plant as if it were made of spun gold, her violet eyes filling with what Alex was amazed to recognize as tears. "I do not understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you help your enemies?" Alex looked past her toward the improvised medical area where sanguine civilians lay dying while she slowly sacrificed herself to keep them alive. "Because right now, I don't see enemies. I see people in need, and someone brave enough to give everything to help them." The moment stretched between them, human and sanguine, soldier and refugee, 2 beings from warring species connected by the simple recognition of shared compassion. Alex felt something shift in his understanding of the war, of the enemy, of the very nature of the conflict that had brought them to this poisoned world. The spell was broken by the whistle of incoming artillery. Both human and sanguine forces had apparently discovered their unauthorized ceasefire and were preparing to remind them that wars don't pause for humanitarian concerns. "Go," Seraphina urged, clutching the flower against her chest. "Your people are coming, and mine will not understand why you are here." Alex nodded, already moving toward the perimeter. "Take care of yourself, Seraphina. Those people need you alive, not martyred." As he reached the outer barriers, Alex heard her voice calling after him in perfect standard, "Thank you, Alex Murphy. For the first time in 8 centuries, someone has given me a gift freely given." The return to his observation post came under sporadic fire from both sides, apparently convinced he had either been captured or was defecting. Alex reached safety just as the first bombardment began falling on Zira Station, both human and sanguine forces determined to deny the facility to their enemies. "What the hell were you thinking?" Captain Reeves demanded over the comm. "You could have been killed, captured, or worse." "I was gathering intelligence, sir," Alex replied, watching through his scope as sanguine transports evacuated the civilian refugees under cover of defensive fire. "And I can confirm that the facility was being used for humanitarian purposes, not military staging." Through his enhanced optics, Alex caught one last glimpse of Seraphina as she helped load the last of the refugees onto evacuation transports. Despite the chaos around her, she still held the small earth flower against her chest like a talisman. That night, back at Forward Operating Base Delta 9, Alex stared at intelligence reports about sanguine troop movements and wondered how many other military targets were actually refugee camps. Dr. Yates found him in the recreation area again, this time carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Heard you had an interesting day," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I gave a dying enemy soldier some food and a flower," Alex replied. She acted like it was the most amazing thing that had ever happened to her. "According to her psychological profile, it probably was," Dr. Yates said gently. "Seraphina Nightwhisper has been classified as a living weapon for her entire adult life. She's probably never received anything that wasn't calculated to enhance her combat effectiveness." Alex considered this for a long moment. What kind of people turn someone capable of such selfless compassion into a weapon and then treat her like she's broken when she shows mercy? The same kind of people who would call a refugee camp a military target and order artillery strikes on dying civilians, Dr. Yates replied. "On both sides of this war, I'm afraid." As Alex finally headed to his quarters, he found himself hoping that Seraphina and her refugees had found safety. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a flower from Earth was blooming in alien hands, tended by someone who had learned that kindness existed. It wasn't much of a victory in a war full of defeats, but it felt like the most important thing Alex had accomplished since arriving on Kethra Prime. Sometimes, he thought, the greatest battles aren't won with weapons but with the courage to offer hope when everything seems hopeless. And sometimes, a simple gift freely given could be worth more than all the military victories in the galaxy. The unofficial ceasefire that emerged around the Xeris station evacuation created what military strategists would later describe as a localized anomaly in standard combat protocols. For Alex Murphy, it meant 3 weeks of the strangest duty assignment of his military career, conducting reconnaissance missions that were actually humanitarian supply runs to a neutral zone where both human and sanguine forces pretended not to see each other while evacuating civilians from war-torn areas. The arrangement had evolved organically after intelligence from both sides confirmed that several hundred non-combatants were trapped in the contested region around Xeris Station. Officially, both military commands maintained their aggressive postures. Unofficially, supply convoys from both sides arrived at predetermined coordinates where medical supplies, food, and evacuation resources were exchanged without direct acknowledgement of cooperation. Alex found himself assigned as the primary human liaison for these operations, a role that brought him into regular contact with Seraphina Nightwhisper, who served as the de facto sanguine coordinator despite her official status as a disgraced prisoner. "The medical supplies you brought yesterday saved 12 lives," Seraphina reported during their third meeting in the abandoned communications station that served as their neutral ground. She looked healthier than she had at Xeris Station. The regular nutrition and reduced stress of evacuation work had restored some color to her pale skin and strength to her movements. Alex nodded, updating his tablet with casualty reports that would never appear in official military briefings. "We have antibiotics coming in tomorrow's supply drop, plus water purification equipment. Your people requested electromagnetic shielding materials. The children are most vulnerable to the atmospheric contamination," Seraphina explained. "Their developing life force processing systems cannot filter the toxins as effectively as adults. The shielding will allow us to create clean zones for recovery." Over the course of their meetings, Alex began to understand the true scope of the refugee crisis. The war between humans and sanguines had displaced thousands of civilians on both sides, but military priorities left little room for humanitarian concerns. The neutral zone operations represented the first successful attempt at joint assistance operations in the conflict's history. More importantly, Alex was learning about Seraphina herself. During quiet moments between supply transfers, she shared stories that painted a picture of someone who had been systematically isolated by her own culture for possessing the very qualities that made her most valuable to others. "I was different from birth," she told him one evening as they waited for delayed evacuation transports. "Most sanguines must concentrate to drain life force from others. It requires conscious intent and emotional detachment. For me, it has always been instinctual, but I can also reverse the process, sharing my own life energy instead of taking it." Alex watched her tend to the small earth flower he had given her, now thriving in a makeshift planter despite the hostile environment. "That sounds like an incredible gift. My people see it as a dangerous flaw," Seraphina said, her voice carrying centuries of accumulated pain. "To willingly give life force away indicates emotional instability and lack of proper control. The Council of Bloodkeepers determined that my abilities could only be used constructively in combat, where my empathetic responses would not interfere with necessary killing. So they made you a weapon because you cared too much about helping people." Seraphina's laugh held no humor. "For 8 centuries, Alex, I have been the monster they send when they need someone drained to death efficiently. I am too useful to eliminate, but too dangerous to allow normal relationships or social connections. The flower you gave me is the first gift I have received since my childhood." Alex felt a surge of anger at the systematic cruelty of using someone's compassion as a weapon against them. "What about your family? Friends? Sanguines who associate with me risk their own social standing. Emotional instability is considered contagious." She touched the flower gently, and Alex noticed its petals seemed to glow slightly at her touch. "I have been alone for longer than your entire species has existed." Their conversations continued over the following days, each exchange deepening Alex's understanding of the being behind the fearsome reputation. Seraphina spoke of worlds she had visited, cultures she had observed during military campaigns, and her growing certainty that warfare was destroying something essential in both their species. Your people fight with passion and hope, she observed one afternoon as they coordinated medical evacuations. Even in battle, you maintain connections to home, to family, to future dreams. My people have become so focused on logical efficiency that we have forgotten what we are fighting to preserve. Alex found himself sharing his own background, growing up on a colony world that had been established through cooperation between multiple species, enlisting in the military to protect the diversity and hope that had shaped his childhood, his growing disillusionment with a war that seemed to destroy more than it protected. My sister gave me that flower to remind me of what we're fighting for, he told Seraphina. She said that hope is something you have to actively cultivate, like a garden. It doesn't grow on its own. Seraphina studied the thriving plant, its impossible resilience in the hostile environment. It has grown stronger since you gave it to me. I do not understand how. Alex suspected he did understand, though he wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding presumptuous. The flower was thriving because someone was finally caring for it with genuine love rather than duty. Just like Seraphina herself seemed to be growing stronger as she experienced her first taste of genuine friendship. Their growing bond was complicated by the return of active hostilities when both their superiors discovered the extent of their cooperation. The neutral zone operations were shut down by direct order from both high commands, and Alex found himself facing formal charges for unauthorized contact with enemy personnel. Sergeant Murphy, Captain Reeves announced grimly, "You're being recalled for court-martial proceedings." The charges include fraternizing with enemy combatants, sharing classified tactical information, and violating direct orders regarding engagement protocols. The last meeting between Alex and Seraphina took place under guard, with both human and sanguine military observers ensuring they exchanged only necessary information about final evacuation procedures. But Alex managed to convey his personal message during the formal debriefing. The civilian evacuation has been successful, he reported officially. All humanitarian objectives have been achieved through mutual cooperation. The assistance provided by human forces has been invaluable, Seraphina replied formally. Sanguine Command acknowledges the professional conduct of all human personnel involved in these operations. But their eyes communicated what their words couldn't: gratitude, affection, and the shared pain of separation forced by military politics. Alex noticed that Seraphina still wore a small pendant that appeared to be made from preserved petals of the earth flower, somehow crystallized into permanent form. As they prepared to part ways, Seraphina spoke one final sentence in perfect standard: "Thank you, Alex Murphy, for teaching me that kindness exists in the universe." "Thank you, Seraphina Nightwhisper, for reminding me what we're really fighting for," Alex replied. The court-martial proceedings lasted 2 weeks, during which Alex learned that his unauthorized diplomatic activities had attracted attention from multiple intelligence agencies, xenopolitical analysts, and surprisingly, several high-ranking military officers who had been questioning the strategic wisdom of total warfare with the Sanguine Empire. Meanwhile, intelligence reports indicated that Seraphina had been recalled to Sanguine High Command for disciplinary review regarding emotional compromise of military objectives. Alex could only imagine what that meant for someone whose crime was showing compassion to enemy civilians. The verdict came down as a reduction in rank and transfer to a non-combat assignment, which Alex considered remarkably lenient given the charges. His military career was effectively over, but he had avoided imprisonment or worse. As he prepared for transfer off Kefra Prime, Dr. Yates brought him one final intelligence briefing. Seraphina Nightwhisper has been classified as recovered from emotional instability and reassigned to active combat duty, she reported. Intelligence suggests she's being prepared for deployment in a major offensive operation. Alex felt his heart sink. After weeks of experiencing friendship and purpose through their humanitarian work, Seraphina was being forced back into her role as a living weapon. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the woman who had learned to smile while tending an earth flower was being prepared to drain enemies to death because that was the only value her own people saw in her emotional nature. That night, as Alex packed his few personal belongings for transfer, he made a silent promise to himself. If the war ever brought him back into contact with Seraphina Nightwhisper, he would find a way to remind her that someone in the universe still saw her as a person rather than a weapon. After all, kindness was like hope, something you had to actively cultivate, like a garden. And sometimes, the most important gardens were the ones that grew in the hearts of people who had forgotten they deserved to bloom. The flower he had given her continued to thrive somewhere among the stars, tended by alien hands that had learned to nurture rather than destroy. It wasn't much of a victory in a war full of defeats, but it was proof that even in the darkest conflicts, compassion could take root and grow into something beautiful. 6 months after his court-martial and transfer, Corporal Alex Murphy found himself in the most unlikely place imaginable, a joint briefing room aboard the neutral vessel Harmony's Edge, where human and sanguine military officers were planning a combined operation that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. The crisis that brought them together defied everything both species understood about Kefir Prime. Ancient automated defense systems, apparently triggered by the sustained warfare between human and sanguine forces, had activated across the planet's surface. The defensive grid, left by the world's original inhabitants millions of years ago, was systematically targeting any advanced technology or large gatherings of life forms. Preliminary analysis indicates the defense network draws power directly from planetary life force, reported Commander Sarah Chen, the human mission leader. It's been dormant for millennia, but our conflict appears to have provided enough ambient psychic energy to trigger full activation. Her sanguine counterpart, High Bloodkeeper Valen Shadowmere, added grimly, our combined forces face complete annihilation within 72 hours unless the central control facility can be disabled. The network's power requirements are exponentially increasing, and it has begun draining life force from both our fleets. Alex listened to the briefing with growing amazement, not at the impossible circumstances, but at the presence of the sanguine team leader sitting across from him. Seraphina Nightwhisper wore formal combat robes that marked her as a First Circle Bloodkeeper, a promotion that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. But more importantly, she wore a small pendant made from crystallized flower petals that caught the light like captured starfire. When their eyes met across the briefing table, Alex saw recognition, relief, and something that might have been joy flicker across her features before professional composure reasserted itself. The central facility requires infiltration by a mixed team, Commander Chen continued. The defensive systems are designed to counter single-species tactics. Our analysis suggests that human adaptability combined with sanguine life force manipulation represents our only chance of success. High Bloodkeeper Shadowmere gestured toward Seraphina. Bloodkeeper Nightwhisper possesses unique abilities that may prove essential. Her capacity for both draining and sharing life force could allow her to interface directly with the facility's power systems. Alex felt his blood chill. What exactly does that interface involve? Seraphina spoke for herself, her musical voice carrying deadly calm. The facility's power core contains approximately 1 million years of accumulated life force. To disable it safely, someone must drain the entire core while remaining conscious and in control. The process will require channeling more life energy than any sanguine has ever survived. That's suicide, Alex said bluntly. Yes, Seraphina agreed simply. But without this action, both our fleets will be destroyed within 3 days, along with all civilian populations on both sides of the conflict. Commander Chen looked between them with interest. Corporal Murphy, you've had previous contact with Bloodkeeper Nightwhisper. We worked together during civilian evacuation operations, Alex replied carefully. I can confirm her commitment to protecting non-combatants from both our species. What he didn't mention was his determination not to let Seraphina face this mission alone, regardless of orders or protocol. The infiltration team consisted of 6 humans and 6 sanguines, with Alex assigned as tactical coordinator and Seraphina as mission specialist. The approach to the ancient facility required 3 days of careful movement through a landscape increasingly twisted by the defense network's growing power. During rest periods, Alex and Seraphina managed brief conversations away from the joint team's formal protocols. She told him about her promotion following the refugee evacuation success, her assignment to specialized diplomatic operations, and her growing role as an advocate for peaceful coexistence between their species. Your gift changed more than my understanding of kindness, she said one evening as they watched alien constellations wheel overhead. It changed my understanding of what I could become beyond a weapon. Alex noticed that she had cultivated a small garden of earth flowers, all descendants of the original cutting he had given her. How many have you grown? 43 so far, she replied with obvious pride. I have been giving them to other sanguines who showed signs of emotional sensitivity. It has become something of a symbol for those of us who believe our people need to rediscover feelings rather than suppress them. A revolution started by a flower, Alex mused. A revolution started by someone who saw worth in a broken weapon and chose to offer hope instead of judgment. The ancient facility defied every architectural principle either species understood. Its corridors twisted through impossible geometries while walls pulsed with patterns that suggested conscious thought. The defense systems that guarded the approach tested not just their combat skills but their ability to work together, presenting challenges that required perfect coordination between human intuition and sanguine life force manipulation. As they penetrated deeper into the facility, Alex noticed how perfectly he and Seraphina worked as a team. His tactical knowledge complemented her supernatural abilities, while his steady presence helped her maintain focus when the facility's alien power began affecting her psychic senses. The power core is directly ahead, Seraphina reported as they reached the facility's heart. I can feel it, like standing next to a star made of living thought. The chamber they entered contained something that challenged the definition of technology. The power core resembled a massive crystalline flower, its petals composed of condensed life force that pulsed with the accumulated energy of an entire world's evolutionary history. Around its base, control interfaces flickered with patterns that spoke directly to the mind rather than the eyes. Beginning interface protocol, Seraphina announced, approaching the central control matrix. If I lose consciousness during the draining process, use your weapons to destroy the core manually. It will create a catastrophic explosion, but it should disable the network. Alex moved to stand beside her at the control interface. There's another option. Seraphina looked at him with alarm. Alex, you cannot help with this. Humans lack the biological capacity to process raw life force. But I can share the burden, Alex replied, taking her hand. You said yourself that the process requires remaining conscious during massive energy transfer. If you're drawing on two life forces instead of one, you could die, Seraphina said flatly. We could die, Alex corrected. But you definitely will die if you try this alone. And somehow, that strikes me as unacceptable. The gathered human and sanguine team members watched in amazement as Alex refused to step away from the control interface. Through their improvised connection, he felt the vast power of the ancient core as Seraphina began the draining process. The experience transcended anything either species had thought possible. Instead of the typical predatory drain that characterized sanguine life force manipulation, Alex experienced a sharing that seemed to strengthen both of them. Seraphina's consciousness merged with his in ways that allowed them to process the enormous energies together, their combined will channeling forces that would have destroyed either of them individually. As the power core gradually dimmed and the facility's defensive systems began shutting down, something unexpected occurred. The sharing of life force created a permanent psychic bond between Alex and Seraphina, linking their thoughts and emotions in ways that neither fully understood but both instinctively accepted. Impossible, breathed High Bloodkeeper Shadowmere as he observed the energy readings. Interspecies life force bonding has never been achieved. The biological incompatibilities alone should have killed them both. Commander Chen watched the power indicators drop to safe levels as the planetary defense network went dormant. Maybe incompatibility isn't the right word. Maybe it's complementary. The successful mission created ripple effects that extended far beyond tactical victory. Both human and sanguine high commands found themselves forced to acknowledge that their most effective operations were those that combined their species' unique strengths rather than competing through pure aggression. Alex and Seraphina's bond became a subject of intense study, but more importantly, it became a symbol of possibility. Their success led to expanded joint operations, cultural exchange programs, and eventually, formal peace negotiations that acknowledged both species' legitimate interests in the contested regions. 1 year later, Ambassador Alex Murphy and cultural liaison Seraphina Nightwhisper worked from a joint facility orbiting Kethra Prime, now designated as a neutral world where both species could study the ancient technologies they had nearly destroyed through warfare. The latest botanical report shows successful cultivation of Earth flora in 16 different sanguine colonies, Seraphina reported during their weekly coordination meeting. The children especially seemed drawn to gardening projects. Alex smiled, watching through the observation port as sanguine and human children played together in the station's garden areas. Any word from the council about expanding the cultural exchange programs? Formal approval came through this morning, Seraphina replied, her joy evident despite her attempt at professional composure. It seems that teaching emotional expression through horticulture is being recognized as a valuable therapeutic technique. Their bond had evolved over the year from crisis-forged connection to genuine partnership in every sense. Alex could feel Seraphina's contentment as she watched the children tend their gardens, just as she shared in his satisfaction at seeing former enemies learning to build rather than destroy. "Alex," she said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the observation port, "do you ever regret the path that brought us here?" Alex considered the question seriously, feeling through their bond how important his answer was to her. "I regret the war, the deaths, the waste of everything we could have built together instead of tearing apart. But I don't regret meeting you, or the gift that started everything." Seraphina smiled, her expression radiant with the joy she no longer felt obligated to hide. "In 8 centuries of existence, that simple flower was the first thing anyone ever gave me freely, without expectation of payment or service. Now I tend gardens across the galaxy, and every blossom reminds me that kindness can grow in the most impossible places." Through the observation port, they watched as a group of young sanguines carefully transplanted earth flowers into specially prepared soil, their pointed ears twitching with concentration and delight. Human children worked alongside them, learning to sense the subtle life force signatures that indicated healthy plant growth. "Sometimes," Alex said softly, "the most important victories aren't won on battlefields. They're won in moments when someone chooses to offer hope instead of hatred." Seraphina's hand found his, and through their bond, Alex felt her complete agreement. The gift of a simple flower had grown into gardens that spanned star systems, tended by beings who had learned that cultivation required patience, care, and the willingness to see potential beauty in the most unlikely soil. Below them, Kethra Prime turned slowly in the light of its star, its surface now marked not by battle scars but by the green growing things that proved life could flourish when given the chance. In the end, that might be the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that even in the darkest conflicts, hope could take root and bloom into something that transformed not just individuals, but entire civilizations. The flower he had given her had become a forest, and the kindness that started it all continued to grow, one small act of compassion at a time.